The year was 1887. The New Mexico territory was a raw, unfinished thing, and Kestrel's Bluff was the rawest edge of it. Dust did not just settle here. It carved. It found the cracks in window panes and the doubts in men's hearts. The wind, coming off the high desert, smelled of alkali and distance, carrying the sound of a lone horse whinnying, its protest sharp against the creak of the sign for the Lantern Jaw Saloon. Kerosene lamps, lit too early in the dusk, cast greasy yellow light onto the boardwalk, illuminating nothing but the grit that coated every surface. This was a town holding its breath, waiting for either rain or damnation. Into this simmering light stepped Elowen Pike. She was 22 years old, but the desert sun and a lifetime of worry had tried to age her faster. She failed to look worn. Her spine was straight. Her hands, though chapped, held the heavy leather chest of her bookbinding tools with a possessive grip. It was her only anchor, the repository of her trade and her identity. Her father, Bram Pike, had his hand clamped around her upper arm. His grip was proprietary, his knuckles white. Bram had once been a stonecutter, a man who shaped granite with precision. Now, he was a hollowed-out shell, inhabited only by the ghost of whiskey. His eyes, frantic and red-rimmed, scanned the saloon doors, ignoring the way his daughter flinched from his touch. He was dragging her, not walking with her. The chest bumped awkwardly against her hip. "It's just for collateral, Elle," Bram whispered, the lie souring the air between them. He had been whispering this same lie for the last mile. "Just a word with Silas Breed. He'll advance me a barrel. Just one. He respects me. You'll see." Elowen said nothing. Her silence was a heavy, polished stone she had carried since her mother died 5 years prior. Arguing was pointless. It only agitated the thirst that ruled him. She pulled her threadbare shawl tighter, the clean, sharp smell of lye soap, paper, and old leather rising from her clothes. It was a stark, defiant scent against the miasma that hit them as Bram shoved the batwing doors open. The Lantern Jaw exhaled its breath-stale beer. Sweat, unwashed bodies, cheap perfume, and the overarching dampness of despair. The saloon went quiet, but only for a moment. It was the specific, judgmental hush that falls when a predator enters, followed by prey. Men at the bar, drifters, mule skinners, hopeful prospectors with hollow eyes paused their games of faro. The piano player, a thin man with a drooping mustache, let his hands hesitate over the keys, creating a discordant, hanging chord. At the back, behind the heavy mahogany bar that he polished with obsessive, circular motions, stood Silas Breed. Breed was a man built of soft edges and sharp calculations. He wore a velvet waistcoat, pearl gray, even in the suffocating heat. He was meticulously clean in a town defined by grime. He smiled, a slow unfolding of insincere benevolence. As he set his polishing cloth down, "Bram, a pleasure," he said, his voice smooth as oiled wood. "And you've brought—" His eyes traveled over Elowen. It was not the look of a man assessing a woman. It was the look of a man appraising livestock. He noted the straight back, the strong hands, the clear, intelligent eyes that met his without flinching. "You've brought your daughter. She's fetching," Bram slurred, shoving Elowen forward a step. The heavy chest in her arms nearly made her stumble, but she caught her balance, her boots planting firmly on the sawdust-covered floor. "I need a barrel. Silas, a full one. She'll stand for it. She's a hard worker. Good with books." Silas Breed did not look at the leather chest of tools. He continued to look only at Elowen. "Collateral," he mused, tapping a single, clean fingernail on the bar top. "I am not a bank, Bram. Collateral must be held. Tools are easily lost. A barrel is a significant advance." From a drawer beneath the bar, he produced a piece of paper. It was already written out, the ink dark and official. "I do, however, believe in apprenticeships. Hard work. A girl her age needs a steady trade. We can always use help. Serving, cleaning, the finer points of hospitality." He dipped a fresh steel nib pen into a heavy glass inkwell and set it beside the paper. She'll work off your debt. A simple service indenture. Sign here, Bram. Your mark will do. Bram Pike, seeing only the amber glow of the stacked barrels behind Breed's shoulder, lunged for the pen. His hand was shaking so violently that he nearly dropped it. Elowen watched, frozen, as he gripped the pen like a weapon and scrawled a shaky X where Silas pointed. A cross mark. The mark of a man who had sold his name for a drink. The batwing doors swung open again. This time, the silence that fell was different. It was not the hush of judgment. It was the silence of respect, mixed with a healthy dose of distance. Cyrus Vale did not look like a man who belonged in a saloon. He was tall, broad in the shoulders from work, not from bar fights. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of long days spent alone, mending fences and breaking horses. His hat was stained with sweat and alkali, his canvas duster coated in the pale dust of the high plains. His ranch, Dry Cedar Basin, was a good day's ride out, a place most men avoided for its harshness and its solitude. He was known in Kestrel's Bluff as a man of few words and immovable boundaries. He stopped just inside the door, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. He was here for two things: a 50-pound sack of salt for his cattle and a box of .44 caliber cartridges for his Winchester. He smelled the whiskey, the smoke, and something else. The sharp, acidic tang of human fear. His gaze settled on the tableau at the bar. He saw Silas Breed, his posture triumphant. He saw Bram Pike, already reaching for a proffered glass. He saw the ink-stained paper, and he saw the girl. He saw Elowen Pike. She was looking at the paper, her face pale as bleached bone beneath the grime of the road. Her hands were clenched on the handle of her leather case. She was not looking at her father. She was looking at the ink, at the lie captured on the page, as if it were a living snake. Marlowe Knott, Breed's deputy and the saloon's muscle, leaned over the bar from the far end. Knott was a thick, greasy man whose knuckles were permanently scarred and broken. He smirked, his voice a low, carrying whisper clearly meant for the whole room. "That's the ticket, Silas. Whiskey debt girls belong to the house. She'll be earning her keep on her back by morning." A few men at a nearby table chuckled nervously into their beers. Cyrus Vale moved. He did not stride. He simply covered the distance to the bar, his boots making almost no sound on the floor. He placed an empty canvas sack on the polished wood, well away from the indenture paper. "Salt," he said, his voice a low rumble, like rocks moving underwater. "And the cartridges." Silas Breed looked up, his pleasant mask momentarily cracking with annoyance at the interruption. "In a moment, Vale. We are concluding a business arrangement." Cyrus's eyes did not move from the paper Elowen was staring at. He was a rancher. He knew contracts. He knew feed contracts, water rights, and he knew the crooked, looping lines of a legal trap. He recognized the typeface, the cramped legal jargon. It was not a simple indenture for services. He saw the words, 3-year term, and further down, in print so small it was nearly invisible, penalty for departure commensurate with total debt, and forfeiture of all wages and property. It was not an apprenticeship. It was ownership, written in the polite language of Eastern lawyers. Elowen's voice, when it came, was not loud, but it cut through the smoke and the stink like fine steel. "I am not property." She looked directly at Silas Breed, her chin high. Her knuckles were white on the handle of her chest. "My father is drunk. This document is not legal." Silas Breed laughed. It was a soft, unpleasant sound, like damp leaves crushing. "Dear child, your father made his mark. The law of the territory is quite clear on debt. Everything has a price. Your father's price is 1 barrel of my best whiskey." Cyrus Vale's hand moved, not toward the Colt revolver holstered low on his hip. He reached into the deep inner pocket of his canvas duster. He pulled out a heavy leather pouch, tied with a rawhide thong. He dropped it on the bar. The sound was not a jingle, but a dull, heavy thud of silver dollars. He pulled out a second, smaller pouch, dropped it. The clink of coins was sharp, definitive. The entire bar leaned in. Even Bram Pike turned. his eyes wide and greedy. "That," Cyrus Vale said, his voice flat, "is for the salt and the cartridges. This," he pointed to the 2 pouches, "is for the girl." Silas Breed stared at the money. It was far, far more than the whiskey was worth. "I don't understand. Vale, we have an agreement, a signed indenture." "No," Cyrus said. He looked at Breed, his eyes the color of a winter sky, cold and clear. "I'll pay double his damn barrel." He paused, his gaze moving to Elowin for one fraction of a second, then back to the saloon owner. "And no." The word hung in the air. No. It was a word, the lantern jaw. And Silas Breed, rarely heard. Silence descended, absolute and heavy. The only sound in the entire saloon was the heavy, rhythmic thud-tock of the grand pendulum clock in the corner. A gaudy, oversized thing Breed had imported from St. Louis. Thud-tock, thud-tock. It was the sound of a heart beating in the suffocating darkness. Silas Breed stared at the silver. He was a man trapped between 2 pleasures, the immediate, substantial gain of coin, and the long, slow, satisfying pleasure of owning someone. The money was clean. The girl was power. Cyrus Vale waited. He did not move. He did not blink. He was not threatening violence. He was stating a fact. He was a mountain, and the path was closed. Elowin watched him. Her breath caught in her throat. She did not understand. This man, this total stranger with dust in the creases of his face and an unreadable sorrow in his eyes, had just stepped between her and the abyss. Slowly, his movement stiff with anger, Silas Breed pushed the 2 pouches toward his side of the bar. The money was too good. Vale was not a man to cross lightly over something he had clearly decided. The profit was now. The trouble of dealing with the rancher could wait. "Vale," Silas said, attempting to regain control, his voice regaining its oily smoothness. "You're buying yourself an expensive servant. She has a father's debt to work off, after all." "I'm not buying a servant," Cyrus said. He reached over, his hand calloused and steady, and took the piece of paper. Elowin flinched, a terrible cold dread rising that he would simply sign his own name to it, transferring her ownership. Instead, he tore it. He tore it once, neatly, down the middle. Then again, the sound of the ripping paper was louder than a gunshot in the tense room. He let the pieces flutter from his fingers to the sawdust-covered floor. He turned his gaze, not to Elowin, but to Bram Pike, who was staring, dumbfounded and trembling, at the money he had lost and the whiskey he would not get. "You," Cyrus Vale said, and the quiet authority in his voice made Bram physically shrink. "You just sold your daughter's life for liquor." He bent slightly, retrieving the torn pieces of the contract from the floor, as if collecting evidence of a crime. He straightened, holding the scraps in his fist. He looked at Elowin, his expression impossible to read. "I bought her freedom." The sound of the tearing paper had not yet faded before Bram Pike let out a hoarse, animal growl. The whiskey-fueled fog in his eyes cleared, replaced by the sharp panic of an addict denied his fix. He saw the silver pouches on Breed's side of the bar. Money that had been, for a fleeting second, his. "That's my money," he snarled, lunging not at Cyrus but at the bar, his fingers clawing at the polished wood. "He owes me. That was our deal." Marlowe Knott, the heavy-set enforcer, moved instantly, his meaty hand slamming down on Bram's wrist. The crack of bone on wood was sickeningly loud. Bram yelped, clutching his hand. "A man's got a right," a voice slurred from a dark corner table. "A right to his own property, his own kin." A few other drunks, emboldened by the conflict, nodded in hazy agreement. "That's right. Man's law." The tension snapped, the air thickening. Elowin Pike, holding her heavy chest, took one involuntary step back, her knuckles brushing the wall. She was trapped between her father's pathetic rage and the saloon owner's cold calculations. And then the front doors opened again, a rectangle of pale, dying light cutting through the smoke. Trouble. Silas. The man who entered wore a tin star on a dusty vest. Deputy Dent Avery was a tall, reedy man with a narrow face and eyes that were too close together. He moved with a practiced, languid authority. But his gaze went first to Silas Breed, not to the disturbance. He was a dog checking with his master. "Just a misunderstanding, deputy," Silas Breed said, his voice a silken balm over the room's raw nerves. He gestured with an immaculate hand toward the scattered pieces of paper on the floor. "Mr. Vale here seems to believe he can interfere with a signed contract." Dent Avery's gaze slid to Cyrus Vale. He knew Vale. Everyone did. The man from Dry Cedar Basin who kept to himself and bought supplies twice a season. A man who caused no trouble, and was therefore, in Avery's book, an unknown and unpredictable quantity. Avery pulled a small, leather-bound notebook from his vest pocket, a stub of a pencil following it. "A contract, you say, was it witnessed?" "It was," Breed said, nodding to his man. "Not. And signed by the girl's legal guardian, a standard indenture for services, to pay off a family debt." Avery looked at Cyrus. "Mr. Vale, you know it's a serious offense to impede a legal business transaction in this territory." Cyrus Vale had not moved. He still held the tattered remains of the fine print clause in his fist. He looked at the deputy, his expression unreadable. "What you had," Cyrus said, his voice level, "was not a legal business transaction. You had coercion. That's a strong word." "Vale," Avery said, wetting the tip of his pencil with his tongue. "It's the right one," Cyrus countered. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. New Mexico Territorial Law, Section 12. An agreement or contract for servitude, signed under duress or in exchange for intoxicating spirits, is void on its face. You know that, Avery. And you also know, his voice dropped, gaining an edge of cold iron, that bodily freedom cannot be held as collateral for a whiskey debt. A stunned silence followed. This was not the frontier brawling they were used to. This was law. Silas Breed's face tightened, a flicker of genuine surprise in his eyes. He had not expected a backcountry rancher to cite statutes. Deputy Avery faltered, his pencil hovering over the page. "Now, I'm not sure I recall that specific. It's the law." Cyrus stated, "It was final." It was Elowen who spoke next. Her voice was shaking, but it was clear as a bell. All eyes turned to her. She stood straight, her shoulders back, the heavy case of her tools held in front of her like a shield. "He is not my legal guardian," she said, looking at Dent Avery. "Not in this. He did not sign that paper. He made a mark, an X. I am of age. I am literate." She set the heavy chest down on the floor with a solid thump. She held up her right hand, her fingers stained with ink and glue. "I sign my own name. I did not sign that paper, and I will not." It was a declaration. She was not her father's property. She was not Silas Breed's collateral. She was herself. "Ah ha ha." The sound was a dry rustle of a laugh from Silas Breed. He had recovered. He looked at the 2 pouches of silver. He looked at Elowen's defiant face. He looked at Cyrus Vale's steady, immovable calm. He had been beaten in this moment, but the war was far from over. He slid the 2 pouches into a drawer beneath the bar. The clack of the closing drawer was a final, punctuating sound. "Mr. Vale," Silas said, his smile returning, all teeth and no warmth. "You are a generous man. You've paid a finder's fee. Let's call it to clear a poor man's debt." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential, venomous whisper that was meant for the entire room to hear. "But you'd be wise to remember, in Kestrel's Bluff, a father's debt is a daughter's to pay. That is a law older than any of your books, Mr. Vale. She still owes, just not to me." The seed of malice was planted, watered with public spite. He had just painted Elowen not as a free woman, but as damaged goods, a debtor who had simply changed creditors. Cyrus Vale looked at the saloon owner for a long, quiet moment. Then he turned his back on him, a gesture of dismissal more profound than any insult. He looked at Elowen. He did not offer his hand. He did not smile. He simply nodded toward the door. "You're free to go, Miss Pike. Where you go is your choice." Elowen looked at the men in the room, their faces a blur of suspicion and leering curiosity. She looked at her father, who was now slumped over the bar, his brief flash of rage extinguished, leaving only the trembling, desperate need. She looked at Silas Breed, whose smile was a promise of future torment, and she looked at the bat-wing doors behind Cyrus Vale, which represented the vast, unknown, and dangerous expanse of the night. She did not trust this tall, silent rancher. He was a stranger. He was a man, and men in this territory had taught her only to expect disappointment and danger, but he was the only one who had spoken of law. He was the only one who had not tried to own her. The door behind Silas Breed, the one that led to the back rooms, was closed and locked. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, what waited behind it. She made her choice. She bent, her spine straight, and picked up her heavy leather chest. "I will go with you," she said to Cyrus, her voice low. "For now." Cyrus Vale nodded once. He still held the scraps of the contract. He walked to the pot-bellied stove in the center of the room. It was glowing a dull red against the evening chill. He opened the small iron door. The heat washed over his face. He did not throw the whole paper in. He held up the one piece, the one with the fine print penalty clauses, the trap. He held it so Elowen could see it. Then he dropped it onto the embers. The paper curled, blackened, and flared into a bright orange flame. He had not just torn the contract, he had destroyed the lie. Dent Avery, who had watched all of this, slowly, deliberately, wrote 2 words in his notebook. He underlined them. Vale, interfering. He snapped the book shut. Cyrus Vale turned and walked to the door. He held the batwing open for Elowen. She stepped through, her head high, her tool chest in her hand. She did not look back. He followed her out, letting the doors swing shut, cutting off the yellow light and the sour smell of the saloon. They stood on the boardwalk. The wind had picked up. It was colder, a fine, misting rain. Not yet a storm, but the promise of one, began to fall, turning the thick dust of the street into a dark, spreading paste. The air smelled of wet creosote and an oncoming change. From somewhere down the darkened alleyway, the sound of a lone harmonica began to play. It was a mournful, sliding tune, a song of loss and long distances. It sounded less like music and more like a warning. Cyrus Vale collected his 50-pound sack of salt and the small box of cartridges, paying the clerk at the mercantile with coin from a different pocket. He said nothing about the events at the Lantern Jaw, and the clerk, seeing his face, asked no questions. He led his horse from the rail, a solid-hoofed gray gelding, then stopped at the livery. He returned a few minutes later, leading a short-backed, sturdy mule. Elowen Pike stood exactly where he had left her, on the boardwalk, her leather chest at her feet. She had not moved, a small, rigid figure against the vast, darkening landscape. The wind was pulling at the loose strands of her hair. "Can you ride?" he asked. It was not a question of manners. It was a question of survival. She nodded. "I can ride." "This mule is steady. Your case can be tied behind the saddle." He helped her hoist the chest, his hands brushing hers as they secured the leather straps to the saddle horn and cantle. His touch was impersonal, the calloused efficiency of a man used to handling ropes and tackle. She mounted the mule, her skirts bunching awkwardly. She settled herself, her back straight, her hands gathering the reins. She looked, even on the borrowed mule, like she belonged to herself. Cyrus swung up onto his gelding. "It's a long ride. We'll be on the trail for at least 6 hours, maybe more in this weather. Don't let the mule fall behind." He turned his horse and moved out of Kestrel's Bluff without a backward glance. Elowen nudged the mule, and the small animal followed, its hooves making a hollow clop-clop on the wooden street before falling silent in the thick dust of the main road. The town vanished behind them, swallowed by the dusk and the rising wind. The fine mist had a bite to it, and within the first hour, it turned to something meaner. The temperature plummeted as the last light died, and the mist became ice. It was not snow, it was hail, small and hard as buckshot, driven by a horizontal wind that screamed down from the mountains. It stung Elowen's face. forcing her to ride with her head bowed, one hand shielding her eyes. The landscape was a featureless, roaring dark, visible only by the solid shape of Cyrus Vale's back ahead of her. He was a black silhouette against the gray, moving at a steady, ground-eating pace. They descended into an arroyo, the trail following the path of a usually dry creek bed. Tonight, it was not dry. The Palo Blanco was a shallow stream, but the storm was changing it. Elowen could hear it before she saw it, a rushing, tumbling sound that was not the wind. The water was a churning, muddy ribbon, already swollen to 3 times its normal width. Cyrus paused at the bank, his horse dancing nervously, steam rising from its flanks. "The bank is soft," he yelled over the wind. "Keep the mule's head up. Follow my line exactly. Do not stop." He spurred his gelding into the water. The horse plunged, stumbled as the creek bed gave way, and then found its footing, surging toward the opposite bank, which was higher and undercut. Elowen followed, her heart a cold knot in her chest. The mule was less confident. It balked, its ears flat. She urged it forward, her heels striking its ribs. It leaped, a panicked, uncontrolled jump into the rushing water. The force of the current hit them broadside. The mule's feet, caught in the moving silt and unseen rocks, went out from under it. The animal scrambled, its head going under, and then it lunged upward in terror. The sudden, violent motion was enough. Elowen, unbalanced, lost her grip on the reins. She was thrown clear, not into the water, but onto the collapsing mud of the bank she had just left. She cried out, a short, sharp gasp, as she hit the ground and immediately began to slide back, the saturated earth giving way like grease. The weight of her wet wool shawl and skirts pulled her down toward the icy, churning blackness of the creek. She did not even have time to scream before she felt a sudden, violent thwack across her chest. A rope. It bit into her, winding around her arm and torso. Cyrus Vale was off his horse. He had plunged back into the creek, not on his mount, but on foot, the water surging around his waist. He held the end of his lariat, the loop tight around her. He was only feet away, but the water between them was a lethal, roaring force. "Grab the rope," he bellowed, his voice a raw tear in the storm. She already had. Her hands, numb with cold, clamped down on the stiff hemp. He did not pull her up the bank. It was impossible. The mud was too slick. He pulled her across. He set his boots, plunged his arm into the bank, and used his own body as an anchor, dragging her through the last few feet of the surging creek. The icy water closed over her, a crushing, breathless shock that stole the air from her lungs. It was in her boots, her clothes, a solid weight of impossible cold. Then she was on the other side, on a rocky ledge, gasping, retching, and shaking so violently she could not stand. Cyrus scrambled up after her, the rope still in his hand, his face a mask of grim effort in the dark. He hauled her to her feet. "We cannot stop," he whistled, a piercing, sharp sound, and his gelding, which had stood steady on the bank, moved toward them. The mule was 50 yards downstream, scrambling up the far bank, Elowen's precious chest still, miraculously, tied to the saddle. Cyrus did not go for the mule. He put his hands on Elowen's waist and, with no ceremony, lifted her clear off the ground and onto his own saddle. He swung up behind her, his body a solid, wet wall against her back. "Hold on," he ordered. He turned the horse away from the creek and up into a small, sheltering grove of cypress trees. They were not alone. 2 sparks of pale, greenish-yellow light gleamed from the shadows. Elowen's breath hitched. A low, throaty rumble, almost too deep to be heard, vibrated through the air. A puma. It was long, pale, and starved-looking, crouched on a low-hanging branch not 20 feet away. It had been drawn by the chaos, by the scent of wet, panicked animals. Cyrus Vale did not hesitate. He did not reach for the Winchester on his saddle. He drew his Colt revolver, the sound of the hammer clicking back deafeningly loud. He fired, not at the cat, but at the rock just above its head. The explosion of the gunshot was a violent clap of thunder. The cat hissed, a sound like steam escaping. and recoiled as rock chips peppered it. In that same instant, Elowen, acting on pure, desperate instinct, fumbled in the oilcloth satchel on the saddle. Her fingers found what she was looking for, a small box of lucifers. Her hands were shaking, her fingers wooden with cold, but she managed to strike one. It flared. She grabbed a dry, dead branch from the ground, a resinous piece of cypress. The flame caught the resin. She jammed it into a clump of dry grass. The fire flared up, a sudden, bright whoosh of light. The combination of the gunshot and the sudden blaze was too much for the predator. With a final spitting snarl, the puma was gone, a pale streak vanishing into the dark. Cyrus holstered his revolver. He looked at the small, defiant fire she had built. Then he looked at her. He said nothing. He kicked the fire out, plunging them back into darkness, and urged the horse forward, up the ridge and away from the roaring creek. The last 2 hours of the ride were a silent, freezing blur. Elowen's teeth chattered so hard her jaw ached. She was pressed against him, his wet duster a cold, sodden weight, but his body heat was a faint, living warmth against her back. She focused on that, and on the steady, rocking gait of the horse, and she did not let herself faint. They arrived at Dry Cedar Basin. Elowen saw it through a haze of exhaustion. It was not a ranch. It was a fortress of solitude, a main house, built of square-cut timber and stone, braced against the wind, a solid-looking barn, and a tall, skeletal wind tower, its blades spinning frantically in the storm. The metal squeak, 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 a lonely, repeating cry. The place was impecced, orderly, and profoundly empty. He dismounted and, before she could slide, lifted her down. Her legs buckled. He held her up by her arms for a second, his grip firm, until she could stand. A black dog, shaggy and with one ear flopping, came bounding from the porch, barking a greeting that was cut short when it saw Elowen. It stopped, sniffed the air, and let out a low, uncertain whine. "Brindle, it's all right," Cyrus said. His voice was rougher now, torn by the wind. He half carried her inside. The house was cold and dark. He set her down in a chair by the hearth, struck a match, and lit a pre-built fire. The kindling caught, and light flared, showing a room that was like the man, functional, clean, and stripped of all comfort. He disappeared and returned with a heavy wool coat, the kind sailors wore, dark and smelling faintly of cedar. "Get out of those wet things," he said, his back to her. "That room, it's yours." He pointed to a closed door. "There is a bolt on the inside. Use it." He went outside, back into the storm, to see to his horse and, she presumed, to find her mule. Elowen did not hesitate. She carried the coat into the small, dark room. It contained a narrow cot, a washstand, and nothing else. She stripped off her soaking clothes, her fingers fumbling with the buttons, and rubbed herself dry with a coarse, clean towel left on the stand. She put on the heavy coat. It was enormous, swallowing her, the sleeves hanging past her hands, but it was warm and dry. She bolted the door. She sat on the cot, listening. The wind shrieked around the corners of the house. The wind tower squeaked its endless, repeating complaint. And then, from the main room, she heard another sound, a cough. It was not a cough from a cold. It was a deep, ragged, tearing sound, followed by a sharp intake of breath, as if the motion itself caused him agony. It was the cough of a man with an old, badly healed wound in his chest. She waited. It came again, worse this time, quietly. She unbolted her door. She went to her own leather chest, which he must have retrieved and brought inside while she was changing. It was damp, but her tools and supplies were protected by oiled canvas. She opened it. She bypassed her bookbinding tools, the awls, the presses, the bone folders. She went to a smaller, wooden box in the corner, her mother's box. She brought the box to the hearth, where Cyrus now sat, hunched over, his face pale and slick with sweat in the firelight. He looked up as she approached, his eyes sharp and suspicious. Elowen did not speak. She took the kettle from the hook, checked that it had water, and hung it over the flames. From the box, she took a small linen bag of dried herbs comfrey, yarrow, and plantain. She took a clean strip of linen. He watched her, his body tensed. As the water heated, she dipped the bag of herbs into the steaming water, letting it steep, the sharp, clean scent of the poultice filling the room. When it was ready, she wrung out the excess water. "Take off your shirt," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He stared at her. "I don't need." "You are hurt," she said, not as a question. "You went into the water. That is an old wound. It will fester with the cold." His jaw set, a line of stubborn pride. But another racking cough seized him, and he winced, his hand flying to his left side, slowly, his face grim. He unbuttoned his wet shirt. A thick, ropey scar, badly healed and puckered, ran from just below his collarbone down his ribs. It was an old bullet wound, and it was an angry, inflamed red. Elowen said nothing. She stepped forward. He flinched as she approached, a subtle tensing of his muscles. She stopped, keeping a careful distance. She held out the poultice. "You can put it on," she said, "or I will." For a long moment, they stared at each other. He finally grunted, a sound of frustrated surrender, and took the hot, steaming cloth from her. He pressed it to the scar, hissing as the heat met his skin. Elowen stepped back. She took another clean, dry blanket from a shelf and sat on the far side of the hearth, on the floor, as far from him as she could get while still feeling the fire's warmth. The black dog, Brindle, who had been watching this entire exchange, stood up, walked over to her, sniffed her hand, and then lay down on the floor outside her bolted bedroom door, facing the main room. A silent, self-appointed guard. The storm raged outside. Inside, the only sounds were the crackle of the logs in the fire and the low, pained breathing of the rancher. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, two strangers bound by a night of violence, water and fire, not touching, not speaking. Elowen watched the flames, her reflection in the dark window showing a small figure wrapped in a coat that was not hers, in a house that was not safe, with a man she did not know. And yet, for the first time in a day, her hands had stopped shaking. The storm broke just before dawn. The wind's high-pitched shriek tapered off into a weary, complaining moan, and the relentless squeak of the wind tower outside settled into a mournful, intermittent groan. Silence, thick and cold, filled the small house. Elowen woke with a start, her hand flying to the heavy wool coat she wore, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. The bolt on her door was secure. The fire in the main room had burned down to glowing red embers, casting a faint, pulsing light. She could hear the sound of Cyrus Vale's breathing from his chair slower, more regular than the night before, but still threaded with a shallow pain. She rose, the floorboards ice cold beneath her bare feet, and quietly added 2 small logs to the embers. They caught slowly, hissing. She found the coffee pot, a heavy enameled thing, and scooped grounds from a tin. She held the pump handle, expecting a long, dry squeak, but the mechanism was well oiled and silent. She filled the pot with water and set it on the grate to boil. The smell of coffee, sharp and life-affirming, filled the room. Cyrus stirred. He was awake, his eyes open, watching her. He had not moved from the chair all night, his shirt still draped over the back of it, the dried herbal poultice a dark stain on the linen wrap at his side. He looked hollowed out, the skin stretched tight over the bones of his face. "The mule is in the barn," he said. His voice was a dry rasp. "Your chest is safe." "Thank you," she said, her voice small in the large room. He nodded, a sharp, curt gesture of acknowledgement. Not welcome. He pushed himself to his feet, wincing as the movement pulled at his side. He put his shirt back on, his fingers fumbling with the buttons, his pride a palpable thing, refusing to show weakness in front of her. Elowen poured 2 cups of coffee into chipped tin mugs. She found a tin of hardtack and a small jar of apple preserves, setting them on the rough-hewn table between them. They ate in silence. The dog, Brindle, came out from the corner, his tail thumping once. He laid his head on Cyrus's knee. Then, after a moment, moved to Elowen, nudging her hand, his dark eyes soft. She gave him a small piece of the hardtack. The silence stretched, heavier than the night's storm. "Where were you bound?" Cyrus finally asked. He was not making conversation. He was gathering facts. "Before Kestrel's Bluff." Elowen looked down into her mug. "Nowhere, or anywhere. I was following the new rail line. Santa Fe, maybe. I find work in the camps and towns along the way, mending Bibles, rebinding ledgers, sometimes just mending clothes." She had not intended to say more, but the sterile, judgmental emptiness of the room pulled the words from her. "I am a bookbinder. My father, my mother and father. They ran a print shop in Dust Haven, back in Missouri." She smiled, a tiny, fleeting expression that was gone as soon as it arrived. "I grew up with the smell of ink, the feel of calfskin leather and the weight of lead type in my hand. They were the only place that was clean." Cyrus watched her, his expression unchanged. He said nothing, just listened. "My father," she continued, her voice losing its brief warmth, "was a stonecutter. He was strong. He could carve a name into granite so perfectly it looked like it was printed. But my mother died 5 years ago. The cholera. After that," she shrugged, a small, tired gesture. "He found a different kind of stone to chip away at, himself. He started at the bottom of a glass and has been trying to get back to the top ever since." She took a ragged breath, the shame of it hot in her throat. "We lost the shop, lost the house. We have been moving ever since. I carry my trade on my back. He carries his thirst." She put the mug down, her hands steady now. She owed this man an explanation, but she would not give him her pity. "He has sold my tools 3 times for whiskey." "I have stolen them back 4. Yesterday," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He ran out of things to sell, except me." She looked up, meeting his cold, gray eyes. She had to make him understand. The broken engagements, the reason she was here, and so utterly alone. "This is not the first time he has tried to use me as collateral. I was engaged, twice." The admission hung in the air, raw and painful. "The first was a printer's apprentice in Kansas City. A good man. He smelled of paper and ink, like home, but his father heard the stories about Bram. He heard about the debts. He said he would not have his son's name tied to a drunk. The second," she said, her voice flat, "was a school teacher. He loved that I could read. He loved that I knew the poets. We were to be married in the spring. Then Bram, my father, he got drunk and broke the window of the mercantile. He was arrested. The school teacher's board told him he could not marry into that. He said he was sorry. He said his position was too delicate." She looked at her hands, the nails broken, the skin stained with the memory of ink. "They told me, both of them, that they couldn't marry the daughter of a town debtor, that I was a bad risk. So you see, Mr. Vale, I am not anyone's property, but I am not a good risk either." The confession died. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the low moan of the wind. Cyrus Vale stared at her, and for the first time, she saw something flicker in the frozen depths of his eyes. It was not pity. It was recognition. He said nothing. He stood, his movement stiff, and walked to a high, simple shelf above the fireplace. It was the only place in the room that held anything other than necessities. On it sat a small, dark wooden box, polished to a high sheen. He took it down. He held it in his big, calloused hands for a long moment, as if testing its weight. He did not open it, he just held it. Elowen watched, her own breathing shallow. This was a ritual. She was intruding on something private. Finally, he unhooked the small brass clasp and opened the lid. He kept it facing him, his broad back hiding the contents. She saw his hand, that huge, capable rancher's hand, tremble. He turned, the box still in one hand, and held out what was inside. It was a daguerreotype in a simple, hinged velvet case, a portrait of a woman. She was young, her hair dark and pulled back severely, but she was smiling. It was not a faint, polite smile. It was a wide, joyful, unrestrained smile, so full of life it seemed impossible the silver plate could contain it. "My wife," Cyrus said. His voice was a flat, dead thing. Rowena Vale." He set the picture on the table, facing Elowen. "She died. 3 winters gone. Right here, in this house. In that room." He nodded toward a second door. One Elowen had not noticed. Set in the back wall. "The baby came too early. It was a boy. He didn't live the hour." He stared at the picture, but his eyes were seeing the memory. The snow was too deep. The doctor from Kestrel's Bluff couldn't get through. It wouldn't have mattered. Eclampsia, he called it, when he finally arrived 2 days later. A poison in the blood. He said there was nothing he could have done. He looked around the stark, empty room, the high ceiling, the extra chairs, the barren, empty spaces. "I built this place for her," he whispered. The words so low Elowen had to lean in to hear them. "I built it for laughter, big enough for children, so their noise would fill the corners." He looked up at the ceiling, his face a mask of iron, but his voice broke, just for a second, on a single, ragged word. "Now, there's only wind." The shared, terrible silence that followed was different. It was not empty. It was filled with the ghosts of 2 different lives, the specters of lost print shops and lost laughter. Elowen, her chest aching with a pain that was not her own, felt the need to fill that silence, not with words, but with something else. She went to her chest, her movements slow. She opened it and pulled out a book. It was not one of her well-bound repairs. It was her own, a battered copy of Leaves of Grass, its cover gone, its pages soft as cloth, the spine held together with her own careful stitching. She sat back down at the table, across from the smiling, dead woman in the silver frame. Her fingers, knowing the way by heart, found a page. Her voice was hesitant at first, a low murmur in the quiet room. "I do not know what you are," she read. "So beautiful, I do not know what you are, any more than I know what health is." She took a breath, and her voice grew stronger, warmer, filling the cold corners of the house. "The press of my foot to the earth springs 100 affections. They scorn the best I can do to relate them. I am enamored of growing outdoors, of men that live among cattle, of the far-spreading roofs of houses, of the long-reaching line of the coast and the sea breeze. I am not stuck up, and I am in my place." Cyrus did not move. He sat perfectly still, his coffee forgotten, his hands resting on the table, his head bowed. He just listened. Elowen watched as the terrible, knotted tension in his shoulders began to ease. The shallow, painful hitch in his breathing smoothed out, deepened. He took a long, slow breath, then another. He was, for the first time in what Elowen guessed was 3 long years, not just enduring the silence. He was breathing. She finished the passage. She did not look up. She closed the book. The spell was broken. The practical world, cold and sharp, rushed back in. "You can't stay," Cyrus said. His voice was rougher than before. "Not for long. It's not—" "I know," Elowen interrupted, her own pride returning, her voice firm. "I do not seek charity, Mr. Vale, and I will not be a debt. You paid for my freedom, not my keep." She stood up. "I am a worker. My hands are strong. I can cook, I can clean, I can mend your clothes, and, by the looks of it," she nodded at his ledgers, piled on a side table, "I can put your accounts in order. I will work for my room and my board, until the pass to Santa Fe is clear and I can move on." They looked at each other, 2 survivors striking a bargain. "No favors owed," he said, using a word that was not quite right, but she understood. "No gratitude, no debt. A room for work." She agreed, holding out her hand. He looked at her hand, surprised. Slowly, he reached out and shook it. His grip was firm, calloused, and surprisingly warm. The bargain was sealed. As if on cue, Brindle, who had been watching them with his head cocked, stood up, walked to Elowin, and pushed his cold, wet nose insistently into her palm. He licked her fingers. His tail gave 2, then 3, slow, happy wags. Elowin, starved for a simple, honest touch, sank to her knees and buried her face in the dog's thick, dark fur. Cyrus watched. He watched his dog. The dog that had been as silent and solitary as he was, give his affection away so easily. A small, almost imperceptible crack formed in the wall he had built around himself. Later that day, Elowin went to her small, cold room. It was hers, for now. From her mother's box, she took the one item that had no practical purpose. It was a small, delicate handkerchief, edged with intricate, hand-tatted lace. Her mother's. She unfolded it. It was white, impossibly white, against the gray, raw wood of the wall. From her tool chest, she took a tiny brass tack. She pinned the handkerchief to the inside of the window frame, hanging it over the glass. It was a small, fragile, defiant speck of lace, a memory of a gentler world. The wind gusted outside, rattling the pane, but the small piece of lace just fluttered, catching the bleak afternoon light. It held. The fragile piece of dry cedar basin lasted 4 days. It was a working piece, defined by the necessities of survival. Elowin Pike, true to her word, became a part of the ranch's austere rhythm. She cooked plain, filling meals beans, salt pork, and fresh bread made from Cyrus's diminishing stores. She mended his canvas trousers, her stitches small, straight, and stronger than the original seams. She took his chaotic pile of receipts and feed bills and, using her bookbinding skills, created a clean, simple ledger, her elegant script bringing order to his finances. Cyrus worked from sunup to sundown. He mended the fences damaged by the storm. He spent a full day resetting the stones of the creek crossing, making it passable. He treated his chest wound with the poultice she prepared each morning, his silence a grudging admission that it was helping. They spoke little, but a language was forming between them. It was in the way he left fresh wood for the stove before he rode out, and in the way she ensured the coffee was hot when he returned. His frame dark with exhaustion. Brindle, the black dog, was the bridge. He divided his time, sleeping outside her door, but following Cyrus everywhere. A silent, 4-legged acknowledgement that the household now had 2 centers. On the 5th day, Cyrus hitched the wagon. "I need to go to Kestrel's Bluff," he stated, not offering an invitation. "The wind tower's top gear is cracked. If it fails, we have no water." "I am coming with you," Elowin said. It was not a request. He looked at her, his jaw set to argue. "I need supplies," she said, holding up a small list. "Flour, lye, needles. We are almost out of coffee. And I will not," she added, her voice dropping, "be left here as a target for your neighbors, or as a prisoner." He recognized the set of her jaw. It was a mirror of his own. He nodded once, curtly. "Stay in the wagon. Do not speak to anyone. I will not be told where to stand." "Mr. Vale," she replied, her own voice cool. "But I will be discreet." The ride back to Kestrel's Bluff was tense, the air charged with unspoken things. The town, when they arrived, seemed to hold its breath as they passed. Faces watched from behind curtains. Men on the boardwalk stopped talking, their eyes following the wagon. The story of what had happened in the Lantern Jaw had festered. Cyrus pulled up to the blacksmith's forge, at the far end of the street, well away from the saloon. "Jory Penn," he said, nodding to the smith. "He's a good man. This is the only stop." "I must go to the mercantile," Elowin said, her hand already on the wagon's side. "No, we need flour, Mr. Vale, or we do not eat. I will be 5 minutes." Before he could protest again, she was down, her heavy bookbinding chest left pointedly in the wagon bed. She walked quickly, her head high, toward the mercantile, which was, by a cruel twist of fate, directly adjacent to the Lantern Jaw. She felt the eyes on her back, burning holes in her shawl. As she passed the saloon's bat-wing doors, the sound of a piano and raucous laughter spilled out. She flinched, but did not slow her pace. Inside the mercantile, the clerk who had sold Cyrus his salt stared at her, his mouth open. She ignored him, walking directly to the barrels at the back. As she was scooping flour into a sack, a man sidled up to her. He was thin, with a gambler's waistcoat and shaky, ink-stained hands. His name was Tomer Quill. She recognized him from the saloon. He reeked of stale whiskey and fear. "You're the girl," he whispered, his eyes darting to the front door. "Vale's girl." "I am my own," Elowen said, her voice sharp. The gambler let out a nervous, wheezing laugh. "Not what Breed is saying. He's telling everyone Vale stole his property. He's put the word out. He wants you back, Miss. He's furious." "Let him be," she said, turning to the lie. "You don't understand," Quill hissed, grabbing her arm. She snatched it away, but he kept talking, his voice a torrent of panicked confession. "It ain't just you. He's got a racket, this apprenticeship business. He's running it in 3 towns, Kestrel's Bluff, Tularosa, even down to Socorro. He gets the girls, the ones with fathers like yours. He gets them to sign, then he ships them, to the mines, to houses. They never come back." Elowen froze, the metal scoop for the lie halfway to the bag. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. Quill looked down, his shame palpable. My sister, she was in Tularosa. She got caught in it. I ain't seen her in 2 years. Breed thinks I'm just a drunk gambler. He don't know I'm looking." His eyes darted around again. "He's arrogant. He and that slug Marlowe Knott. They keep 2 books, 2 sets of ledgers. One for the deputy, all clean. The other, the real one. That's where he keeps the names. The real debts." "Where?" Elowen breathed, her heart hammering. "In the back room," Quill whispered. "The office. Breed's too proud to lock it. He thinks no one would dare. Marlowe's writing in it right now. I seen him." Suddenly, from the saloon next door, there was a crash of glass, a roar of voices. "Fight, fight!" Tomer Quill looked at Elowen, his eyes wide with a desperate, sudden cunning. "That's my diversion," he breathed. "He'll be out here in a second. Marlowe, to break it up. Go, now, if you've got the sand." He turned and ran out of the mercantile, yelling, "He's got a knife!" As predicted, Marlowe Knott came bursting out of the saloon, followed by 2 other men. The clerk from the mercantile, sensing trouble, ran to the front window to watch. Elowen did not hesitate. She dropped the scoop. She did not go out the front door. She went to the mercantile's back door, which led to a narrow, trash-filled alley that ran between the 2 buildings. She slipped into the alley. The saloon's back door was 5 feet away. It was, as Quill had said, unlocked. She opened it an inch. She heard the noise of the fight at the front of the saloon. The back was empty. She slipped inside. She was in a dark, foul-smelling storeroom. Ahead of her was a small, open door, the office. She moved, silent as a shadow. The office was tiny, containing only a desk, a chair, and a cabinet. On the desk, 2 ledgers sat side by side. One was a thick, official-looking book labeled Accounts. The other was a small, cheap, black-bound notebook. Her blood ran cold. She opened the small, black book. There it was, her father's name, Bram Pike. And beside it, not a dollar amount, but the words, "1 barrel best," and the shaky, familiar X. Below it was another name, Lissa Mott. Whiskey, $40. And an X, another, Ana Garcia. Passage, Tularosa, and an X. Her eyes flew to the thick, official ledger. She found the page for Pike. It read, "Cash advance, $30. The lie. The double books. One for the law, showing a simple, legal debt. The other, the real one, showing a transaction in human souls. Marlowe Knott's handwriting, crude and heavy, was on every page. She heard a shout from the front, the fight winding down. She had no time. To memorize it was not enough. To copy it was impossible. She picked up the small, black ledger. She tucked it into the waistband of her skirt. Pulling her thick shawl down to cover the bulk, she turned and fled, back through the storeroom, back into the alley, and back into the mercantile, emerging from the rear storeroom just as the clerk was turning from the window. "All settled?" she asked, her voice breathless, but calm. He nodded, still agitated. "Just some drunks." She paid for her flour, her lie, and her needles. She walked out of the mercantile, her spine rigid, the weight of the book against her back a solid, terrifying burden. Cyrus was standing by the wagon, his face a thundercloud, his talk with the blacksmith clearly over. "You were gone 10 minutes, he said, his voice clipped. The clerk was busy. She replied, climbing into the wagon seat. They rode out of town, the silence heavier than before. They were halfway home, on the long, empty stretch that led to the high basin, when 2 riders appeared on the ridge behind them. They were moving fast. Cyrus saw them. He did not need to speak. He slapped the reins, and the mules lunged forward, the wagon bouncing violently on the rutted track. But the riders were on fresh horses. They cut them off at the pass, skidding to a halt, blocking the road. It was Deputy Dent Avery and Marlowe Knott. "Hold up, Vale," Avery said, his hand resting on his pistol. He looked pleased with himself. "What is it, Deputy?" Cyrus asked, his voice flat, his own hands holding the reins, but his duster was loose, near his hip. "Just a routine check," Avery said, dismounting. "Silas Breed has reported a theft, a valuable piece of property, from his office." Marlowe Knott, his face flushed and furious, stared at Elowen. "She was there. I know she was. That gambler started the fight, and she was there." "I was at the mercantile, Mr. Knott," Elowen said, her voice shaking but her gaze steady. "Search the wagon. Marlowe," Avery ordered. Smiling, Cyrus sat still, his knuckles white on the reins. "You have a warrant for this, Deputy? My badge is my warrant out here. Vale," Avery sneered. Marlowe Knott was ruthless. He ripped open the flour sack, plunging his dirty hands into it. He overturned the sacks of feed. He tossed Cyrus's new gear onto the road. He found Elowen's leather tool chest. "Open it," he snarled. "No," she said. He pulled a knife and slit the leather, cutting the latch. He dumped her precious tools, her paper, her life's work, into the dust of the road. He pawed through it, finding nothing. "It's not here," he growled, kicking the chest. Avery looked at Elowen, his eyes traveling over her, a slow, invasive search. "Step down. Ma'am, a lady deputy ain't available, so you'll have to—" "You will not," Cyrus Vale said. The words were quiet. They were not a request. They were a law. Avery, for the first time, looked uncertain. He had seen the way Cyrus Vale held himself. He looked at Knott. He looked at Elowen. She looked small, frightened, and unremarkable in her heavy shawl. "She ain't got it," Knott spat, disgusted. "Maybe that gambler lied. Maybe he took it." "Get on out of here, Vale," Avery said, trying to regain his authority. "But we'll be watching you. Kestrel's Bluff don't take kindly to thieves." They mounted and rode off, back toward the town. Elowen did not move until they were out of sight. Then, she let out a long, shuddering breath. Cyrus sat beside her, his body rigid with a contained, murderous rage. Slowly, he got down and began to pick up her tools, one by one, placing them back in the ruined chest. She got down to help him. When she bent over, she reached under her shawl, into the lining of her thick wool coat, her mother's coat, the night before. Anticipating this, she had sat by the fire, her needle flashing, and had sewn the small, black ledger into the coat's lining. It was still there, safe. They rode the rest of the way home in a heavy, deepening twilight. They unhitched the mules, fed the stock, and locked the barn. The air was dry, static, and smelled of ozone. Another storm was coming. Exhaustion, deep and cold, settled over them. They sat at the table, the ruined tool chest between them, the ledger now resting on the wood. "They'll be back," Cyrus said. his voice dead. They know. They'll be back, and not with badges. They'll come for the book, Elowen said. And for me. I should take you to Santa Fe. Now, he said, rubbing his face. This is not my fight. You bought my freedom, Mr. Vale, she said, her hand on the ledger. They are trying to steal it back. This book is the proof. This is not just about me. It is about Lissa Mott and Ana Garcia. It is about a racket that covers 3 towns. She looked up, her eyes, in the dim lamplight, burning with a cold, hard fire he had not seen before. I will not run. I have been running my entire life, from my father's debts, from shame. I will not run from this. He looked at her, at the small, determined set of her chin. He looked at the ledger. He thought of his wife, Rowena, who had believed in law and in building a community. He looked at his broken ranch, a fortress of his own grief. This is madness, he said. This is Silas Breed. He owns the law. Then we must find a different law, Elowen said. Before he could answer, the night exploded. A high, terrified screaming of horses from the barn. Brindle erupted from the porch, barking a frantic, desperate alarm. Cyrus was on his feet, his Winchester in his hand, and was out the door in 2 strides. Elowen was right behind him. The night was not dark. It was lit by a terrible, hungry, orange light. The big haystack, the one that held their entire winter's feed, was a tower of flame, and spreading from it, licking at the dry wood of the barn, was a growing wall of fire. 3 figures on horseback were silhouetted against the flames, Marlowe not, and 2 others. They were not just burning the feed, they were trying to burn the barn, with the animals trapped inside. The animals! Cyrus roared. He fired his Winchester into the air, a warning shot that sent the riders scattering back, laughing, into the darkness. He ran to the barn, Elowen at his heels. The heat was a physical blow, a solid wall of scorching air. He wrenched the great barn door open, and the mules and his gelding plunged out, whinnying in terror, their eyes white. The wind tower! Cyrus yelled, seeing the flames now climbing the barn's side. The water, get the pump! The tower was 50 yards away, but the fire was faster. It was already in the dry grass, racing toward the house. The house! Elowen screamed. The ledger! They were separated, 2 small figures against a roaring inferno. Cyrus grabbed buckets. The well, not the tower, it's too slow. They worked, back to back, a desperate, frantic, useless rhythm. He would run to the hand pump, fill a bucket, and throw it on the flames, licking at the house. She would follow, her own bucket seeming to empty before it even hit the fire. They were soaked in sweat, their lungs full of acrid smoke. A spark, carried on the wind. A bright, malicious ember landed on Elowen's wrist as she pumped. She cried out, a sharp sting of pain. She did not stop. A small, white-rimmed blister began to rise on her skin. They were losing. The barn wall was catching, the smoke thick and black. It's too much, Cyrus gasped, his chest heaving, the old wound tearing at his lungs. No, Elowen panted, her face black with soot, her hair singed. A terrible crack of tortured wood sounded above them. A rafter from the barn's porch, eaten through by the fire, gave way. It was falling, a black, flaming spear, directly toward Elowen. Move! Cyrus roared. He did not push her. He lunged, tackling her, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her down and shielding her with his own body as the burning timber crashed precisely where she had been standing. They lay tangled on the ground, the heat scorching their backs. The world was reduced to the roar of the fire, the smell of burning pine, the stink of his sweat, and the acrid, sharp smell of her own singed hair. Her face was pressed against his chest, her ear against his ribs. She could feel his heart, hammering a frantic, desperate beat against her cheek, and beneath it, she felt her own, its rhythm matching his, a terrified, unified pulse in the heart of the fire. He held her for 1, 2, 3 seconds. It was an eternity. It was not a man holding a woman. It was one living, breathing thing protecting another. Then he released her, rolling them both away from the heat. "The house!" he gasped, pushing himself to his feet. They turned. The barn was a lost cause, but the wind, by some miracle, had shifted. The flames were being pushed back, away from the main house and toward the open prairie. But not before they had reached the wind tower. The tall, wooden legs were blackened, and one of the main supports had been eaten through. As they watched, the tower groaned, a metallic, screeching protest. It shuddered, leaned, and then collapsed, crashing to the ground in a tangle of broken wood and twisted metal. The fire burned itself out an hour later, leaving a black, smoking scar on the land. The barn was gone. The wind tower was destroyed, as the first bleak, gray light of dawn touched the high desert. They stood in the ruins, Cyrus Vale and Elowen Pike, soaked, soot-covered, and exhausted. The ranch's water supply was gone. Their winter feed was ashes. They were vulnerable, exposed, and crippled. Cyrus looked at the ruin of his ranch, the physical manifestation of his life's work. His face was a mask of gray ash and utter defeat. Elowen Pike walked over to him. She looked at the smoking pile of the barn. She looked at the twisted metal of the wind tower. Then she looked at the small, black ledger, which she had rescued from the table and was still clutching in her hand. She touched the new, angry burn on her wrist. It was a brand. "No," she said, her voice a raw rasp in the silent dawn. "No more running." She held up the ledger, its cover warped from the heat. "We are going to find your lawyer, Mr. Vale, and we are going to expose every last one of them." The house was an island of cold silence in a sea of devastation. The adrenaline of the fire had fled, leaving behind an exhaustion so profound it was a physical ache. Heavier than any load, the air, even inside, was thick with the stench of wet, charred wood and the ghost of their lost winter. The wind had returned, not as a storm, but as a high, keening presence, rattling the window panes, reminding them of their new, raw vulnerability. Cyrus barred the door. The thick wooden beam sliding into its iron bracket was a sound of finality. He turned, his face a mask of gray soot and a despair so deep it looked like a physical wound. He looked at the ledger, safe on the table, and then at Elowen. "They'll be back before morning," he said, his voice a dead rasp, each word scraped raw by smoke. "They know we have it. They'll come to finish the job." Elowen, too, was shaking. Not from fear, but from the bone-deep chill that sets in after terror has passed. Her clothes were damp with sweat and well water. She looked at her hands, black with soot, the skin around her nails torn. "Then we will be ready for them," she said. Her words were brave. But as Cyrus turned to the light of the fire, the effort of the night caught up to him. A racking cough seized him, a brutal, tearing sound that doubled him over. He braced himself against the table, his knuckles white, his hand flying to his chest. When he pulled it away, Elowen saw a dark stain on his palm. The wound, his old enemy, had reopened. "Sit," she commanded, her own exhaustion forgotten, replaced by the sharp focus of a field medic. He did not argue. The fight was gone from him. He collapsed into the chair by the hearth, his breathing shallow and wet, his face pale beneath the grime. Elowen moved, her actions swift and practiced. She took the kettle, her hands steady, and filled it from the water bucket, one of the last they had. She set it to boil. She brought her mother's wooden box to the table, her fingers finding the clean linen bandages, the dried yarrow to stanch the bleeding, the comfrey to mend. When the water was hot, she brought the basin to him. He watched her, his gray eyes clouded with pain and a weary, profound surrender. "This is madness," he whispered, as she knelt before him. "You should have let it burn. You should run." "And where would I run?" "Mr. Vale," she asked, her voice quiet as she dipped a clean cloth into the hot water. "To another Kestrel's bluff, to another Silas Breed, to another man who thinks a cross on a paper gives him ownership." She looked up, her soot-streaked face illuminated by the fire. "I told you, I am done running." He flinched as she touched the hot cloth to his chest. cleaning the blood and soot from the raw, puckered scar. She worked with an intense, impersonal care. Her hands, though small, were strong and sure. She was a binder of books, a mender of things that were torn. She packed the wound with the dried herbs, her touch light, her breath held in concentration. Cyrus did not move. He watched her. He watched the firelight catch the auburn strands of her singed hair. He watched the line of her jaw, set in fierce determination. He had seen her face terror and fire and the threat of ruin, and she had not broken. She had not even bent. As she began to wrap the clean linen bandage around his torso, her arm passed through the firelight. He saw it then, on the pale skin of her wrist. A burn. It was not large, but it was angry. A red, puckered mark from the ember, already blistering. He reached out, his hand calloused and blackened from the fire, closing not on her wrist, but hovering just over it. His fingers were trembling. Elowen froze. Her hands stopped their work on the bandage. He did not speak. His eyes, fixed on the burn, lifted to meet hers. It was a look of raw, unvoiced apology. A question, a plea. I did this. I brought this on you. His thumb, rough as cured leather, gently, so gently, touched the skin next to the burn. It was not a touch of possession. It was a touch of reverence, a question. Elowen did not pull away. She held her breath, her gaze locked with his. The small, fragile truce of their bargain work for room was dissolving, consumed by the heat of something far more dangerous and far more real. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He took her hand. He lifted her wrist to his mouth. His lips, dry and chapped, pressed against the raw, new burn. It was not a kiss of passion. It was an act of supplication, a benediction. A silent, desperate thank you. Elowen let out a breath she had been holding since the first spark hit the haystack. A single tear, carving a clean path through the soot on her cheek, fell onto his hand. He did not release her. He kept hold of her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it. He looked at her, his eyes clear now, the pain of his wound overshadowed by a different, deeper ache. He tugged, a gentle, insistent pressure. She did not resist. She let him pull her closer. She was still kneeling, and he was in the chair. He drew her into the space between his knees. His other hand came up, his fingers burying themselves in her tangled, damp hair. He held her, his head bowed, his forehead resting against hers. They breathed. For a full minute, that was all they did. They breathed in the smell of each other's smoke, sweat, lye soap, and the faint, herbal scent of the poultice. It was the scent of survival. Elowen, he whispered. It was the first time he had used her name. It sounded rough, new, and yet profoundly right in his mouth. He tilted her chin up with his thumb. His face was inches from hers. She saw the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. She saw the grief for his lost ranch. And she saw, in the gray depths, something new, something she recognized. He was just as lost as she was. He kissed her. It was slow. It was hesitant. His lips were chapped, tasting of soot and the salt of her own tear. It was a kiss of profound, desperate relief, a landing after a long fall. It was not the kiss of a man taking, but of a man asking, "Are you here? Are you real?" She answered him. Her hand, the one he was not holding, came up. Her fingers, stained and sore, rested against the rough stubble of his cheek. She did not push, but she did not retreat. She met his kiss. The pressure deepened. It became a kiss of shared pain, of the barn turned to ash, of the collapsed wind tower, of the ledger that was their only terrible hope. It was a promise that they were not alone in the ruins. Her lips softened under his, a yielding that was not a surrender, but a choice. He held her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones, as if he were memorizing her in the dark. The kiss was deep and slow and achingly gentle. It was everything the world was not. It was a sanctuary. He pulled back, just enough to speak, his voice a ragged whisper against her mouth. "I did not buy you." His words hung in the air, a renunciation of the act that had brought them together. He was exorcising the ghost of Silas Breed, of the silver on the bar. He struggled for the words. The proud, silent man. I ask. He breathed, his eyes locked on hers. I ask to be with you. The last wall around Elowen's heart, the one built of bad risks and broken engagements, crumbled. He was not claiming her. He was not bartering for her. He was asking. He was giving her the one thing no one else ever had the choice. She looked at this man, this broken, solitary rancher who had shielded her from falling timber with his own body. Cyrus, she whispered, her own voice unsteady. She laid her forehead against his, their breath mingling. I choose you, too. The words settled between them, a vow stronger than any contract. He let out a long, shuddering breath and pulled her into his arms. He held her, his arms wrapped tightly around her back, her face pressed into the warm, solid space of his shoulder. She held him back, her small hands gripping the rough fabric of his shirt. They clung to each other, two pieces of wreckage making a whole. The wind howled outside, a forgotten, impotent fury. After a long time, he released his grip, though he did not let her go. You're cold, he murmured, his hands finding her icy fingers. He shifted in the chair, pulling her onto his lap. She was small, and she curled against him as if she had been made to fit there. He was warm. The fire in the hearth was burning low, but the fire in his chest, beneath her ear, was a steady, living heat. He found her hand in the dark and laced his fingers through hers. They sat in the quiet, their clothes still damp, their bodies aching. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say. They just sat, holding hands, listening to the wind rage against the house it could not enter. The exhaustion, finally, was too much. Elowen's breathing, which had been quick and shallow, deepened. Her head, resting on his shoulder, grew heavy. Her hand, clasped in his, went limp. She had found, in the heart of the ruins, the first safe harbor of her life, and she had fallen asleep. Cyrus sat unmoving for a long time. He watched her face in the dying firelight. He saw the strength in the line of her jaw and the vulnerability in the soft curve of her mouth. He looked at the burn on her wrist, a mark he had, in his own way, put there, slowly, carefully, so as not to wake her. He reached for the heavy wool blanket on the back of his cot. He unfolded it with one hand. He draped it over them both, tucking it carefully around her shoulders, pulling it up to cover her. It was an act of profound, simple tenderness, the unvoiced language of a man who had forgotten how to speak it, but found the words. He leaned his head back against the stone of the hearth, Elowen, a warm, trusting weight in his arms, and closed his eyes. At their feet, Brindle, who had not moved from the hearth, let out a low, contented sigh in his sleep. The fire popped, a single, sharp spark, and then the house was quiet, a small, breathing sanctuary against the vast, dark wild. The rising sun was a betrayal. It exposed the full scope of the night's devastation. The barn was a smoking, skeletal ruin. The wind tower, their source of life, was a twisted heap of metal. The air stank of ash and despair. Cyrus stood by the wreckage, his Winchester held loose in one hand. He had not slept. Elowen had not slept. They had sat in the house, the ledger between them, and waited for an attack that never came. The fire, it seemed, had been the attack. A crippling blow, not a killing one. They'll let us starve, Cyrus said, his voice flat. No water, no feed. We'll be forced out in a week. He'll pick us up on the road. Elowen bound her singed hair with a piece of twine. Her hands were steady. Then we do not wait a week. We go to your lawyer. Today. Estelle Bragg, he said, nodding. In Kestrel's Bluff. It's a risk. It is a greater risk to stay, she said, wrapping the precious ledger in oilcloth and placing it deep within her damaged tool chest. Their ride into town was a grim, silent procession. They used the 2 mules, saving the gelding, and skirted the main street, approaching the town from the south. Estelle Bragg's office was a small, neat, clapboard building behind the bank. It was the only law office in Kestrel's Bluff not owned by Silas Breed's interests. Estelle Bragg was a woman in her 50s, a widow, with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She listened, her hands steepled, as Cyrus laid out the facts, the indenture, the coercion, the fire. Then Elowen spoke. She told her story, clear and concise, and finally, she unwrapped the oilcloth and placed the small, black ledger on the desk. Estelle Bragg opened the book. She read the first page. Her expression did not change, but Elowen saw her knuckles go white. She read 3 more pages, her eyes scanning the names, the debts, the X marks. Ana Garcia, Estelle murmured, her voice tight. She went missing from Tularosa 6 months ago. They said she ran off with a drummer. She turned another page. Lissa Mott. Her mother is half mad with grief. She looked up, not at Cyrus, but at Elowen. Child, do you have any idea what you have done? This is not a racket. This is a white slavery ring, and you have the key. He knows we have it. Cyrus said, he burned us out. He'll come for us. Of course he will, Estelle said, standing. She was a tall woman. He cannot let this ledger reach a judge. He will kill you both. So we take it to the judge in Santa Fe. Elowen said, you won't make it to the pass. Estelle said flatly, Silas owns the territory. He has Dent Avery. She tapped the book. This is evidence, but right now, it is stolen property. If Avery finds it on you, he can legally arrest you, and you will disappear from his jail cell. This is the trap. So what do we do? Cyrus asked, his frustration a low growl. Estelle looked at the book, a small, cold smile touching her lips. He is using the law as a weapon, so we shall do the same. We must make this book legal evidence. I will draw up a territorial writ of seizure based on your sworn testimony, Miss Pike. But I cannot serve it. I am just a lawyer. It needs a federal marshal, and the nearest one is 100 miles away. A rock shattered the back window of the office. Avery. He was in the street. Estelle, I know you've got Vale in there. Send him out. Estelle did not flinch. He's escalating. He won't wait. He has to crush you now. A plan, desperate and cold, began to form in Elowen's mind. He wants the book. He thinks he has us trapped, so we let him trap himself. Just then, a rider pounded up the alley, stopping at the back door. It was Tomer Quill, the gambler, his face slick with sweat. He's got your father, he gasped, looking at Elowen. Silas, he grabbed him from the stable not an hour ago. He's holding him at the saloon. He says he'll hand him over to Frisco Cal if you don't bring the book by sundown. Elowen's blood ran cold. Frisco Cal, a name whispered in the camps. A trafficker of human beings. A man who dealt in women and children and shipped them to the coastal brothels. A man who made Silas Breed look like a petty thief. He's using my father, she breathed. It's the final move, Estelle said, her face grim. He's forcing your hand. Then I will play my hand, Elowen said, a sudden, sharp clarity cutting through her fear. She looked at Cyrus. He wants an exchange. We will give him one. Elowen, no, Cyrus said, grabbing her arm. It's a slaughter. Not if he doesn't know who's walking into it, Elowen said. She looked at Estelle. Where is the worst place for an ambush? Tint Hills, Estelle said instantly. A box canyon, north of here. All rattlesnakes and shadow. Only one way in or out. That's where. Elowen said, send word to Silas. Sundown. Tint Hills. The book for my father. The plan was said in whispers. Fast and desperate. Estelle Bragg, her face set, rode out openly, claiming she was going to the county seat. Jory Penn, the blacksmith, met Cyrus at the edge of town, his wagon loaded with 2 heavy anvils and a collection of iron bars. Tomer Quill, his hands shaking, was given a single task: buy whiskey for everyone at the Lantern Jaw, and keep his mouth shut. Dusk found Tinned Hills bathed in a bloody, red light. The canyon walls rose up like teeth. It was a place of execution. Cyrus and Elowen rode in on the 2 mules. Cyrus carried his Winchester. Elowen held a small bundle, wrapped in oilcloth, the shape of the ledger. They saw them at the canyon's end. Silas Breed was there, on his fine black horse. Beside him, Marlowe Knott, and two other men, hard cases Elowen did not recognize, and Bram. He was slumped over a horse, his hands tied, a burlap sack over his head. "A pleasure, Miss Pike," Silas called, his voice echoing in the stone bowl. "You've brought my property." "I've brought the book," Elowen called back, her voice clear. "Where is my father?" "He is right here." "A fair trade." Silas smiled. "Not so fast. Breed." Deputy Dent Avery stepped out from behind a tall spire of rock, his shotgun leveled at Cyrus's chest. "This is an official proceeding. You are in possession of stolen property. Miss Pike and you, Vale, are wanted for interfering with an officer." "This is not your jurisdiction, Dent," Cyrus said, his hands moving slowly away from his rifle. "It is whatever Mr. Breed says it is," Avery sneered. "Now, give Marlowe the book, then we'll discuss your trespasses." This was the trap Estelle had predicted. They were caught. A single pinprick of light flashed from the high canyon rim to the north. "What was that?" Marlowe Knott snapped, looking up. "Just the heat," Silas said, impatient. "Get the book." Then, a second flash, and a third, from the south rim this time. A signal. Avery growled, swinging his shotgun toward the rim. It was not their signal. It was Jory Penn, drawing their eyes. Then, from the canyon mouth, behind them, came a sound like the gates of hell opening. A deafening, metallic crash, followed by another. Jory Penn had just released the two anvils from his wagon, rolling them down the canyon's gravel slope. The sound, amplified by the rock walls, was like a cannonade. The horses, already spooked by the flashing lights, screamed. Silas's black horse reared, fighting the bit. The two hard cases, their horses spinning in panic, fired wildly into the air. "Ambush!" Marlowe roared. In that instant, Cyrus moved. He threw himself from the mule, rolling, his Winchester coming up. He did not fire at Silas. He fired at the rock above Dent Avery's head. Rock chips exploded, stinging Avery's face. The deputy cursed, firing his shotgun, the blast going wide, deafening Cyrus. Dent, enraged, dropped the shotgun and lunged, tackling Cyrus. The two men went down in a cloud of dust and gravel, a desperate, grunting brawl for the rifle. At the same time, Marlowe Knott, seeing Elowen alone, spurred his horse toward her. "The book, you witch!" He grabbed for the oilcloth bundle. Elowen, who had been waiting for this, did not pull away. She grabbed the front of his shirt with one hand, with the other. She reached into her apron pocket. She had not brought flour. She had brought the small bag of dried cayenne pepper she had bought at the mercantile. She threw the entire handful of red powder directly into Marlowe's screaming, open mouth. It was not a human sound he made. It was a liquid, choking, strangled roar. He clawed at his face, his eyes, his throat, blinded and burning. He fell from his horse, convulsing in the dust. Silas Breed, his face a mask of pure fury, saw his plan disintegrating. He saw Avery on the ground with Cyrus. He saw Marlowe incapacitated. He saw Elowen. He drew his knife. "You'll all burn," he shrieked, spurring his horse toward her. "No!" It was Bram. He had been a silent, slumped witness. But the burlap sack had fallen from his head, and in a moment of pure, unthinking clarity, fueled by the last flicker of a father's instinct, he acted. He threw his body sideways, off his own horse, directly into the path of Silas's mount. Silas's horse shied, rearing. Silas, caught off guard, slashed down with the knife, aiming for the man who had ruined his charge. The blade, meant for Elowen's back, tore through the thick canvas of Bram's shirt, slicing a shallow, bloody line across his shoulder. Bram cried out and fell. The act, so sudden, so uselessly brave, was enough. Cyrus, hearing Elowen scream, used the opening. He slammed his elbow into Dent Avery's throat. As the deputy gagged, Cyrus wrenched the man's arms behind his back, his knee in his spine. "Elowen, the rope!" Elowen, her hands shaking, fumbled for the pigging string, the short saddle rope, at her waist. She ran to Cyrus and, with a grim, practiced efficiency, tied Dent Avery's hands. Silas Breed did not wait. He saw the fight was lost. He looked at the bound deputy, at his blinded enforcer, at the bleeding Bram. He looked at Elowin Pike, who stood, covered in dust, breathing hard. Holding the false ledger, he spat, a single word of pure venom. "Dry cedar! I'll salt the earth! I'll burn the roots!" He wheeled his horse and galloped down the canyon, disappearing into the twilight before Cyrus could get a clean shot. Silence fell, broken only by Marlowe's choking and Bram's low groans. A wagon rattled into the canyon. Estelle Bragg sat on the buckboard, Jory Penn beside her, his face grim. Estelle looked at the scene, the bound deputy, the writhing Marlowe, the wounded Bram. Her eyes found Elowin. Elowin unwrapped the real ledger from beneath her coat. Estelle Bragg produced a thick document from her valise. "Deputy Dent Avery," she said, her voice ringing with cold. "Legal power. I have here a territorial writ, seizing this ledger as evidence in the matter of Silas Breed. You are under arrest for conspiracy and interfering with a legal writ." She struck a match, lit a small wax taper, and affixed her official seal to the document, stamping it onto the cover of the black ledger. "It is done. It is evidence now. Legal, binding." That night, the ruined ranch house was a hospital. Bram Pike was feverish, the cut shallow but dirty. Elowin cleaned it, her face grim. He was her father. He had, for 1 second, been her shield. She sat by the hearth, long after Bram had fallen into a restless, whiskey-deprived sleep. The house was quiet. Brindle lay at her feet. She was guarding the fire, guarding the home that had become hers. Cyrus sat at the table, the lamplight falling on his hands. He was writing. He finished, folded the single sheet of paper, and dripped a small bead of wax onto it, sealing it with his thumbprint. He walked over to her. He did not touch her. He just held out the letter. "Estelle has the ledger," he said, his voice low. "She's taking it, and Avery, to the territorial judge in Santa Fe. But Silas is still out there." Elowin took the letter. "If I do not come back from the supply run tomorrow," he said, his eyes holding hers. "If Silas finds me on the road, you take this letter, you ride south. You do not stop until you find Judge Laramie Stoke. You give this to him. It tells him everything." It was not a letter. It was a last will and testament. It was a contingency. It was his final act of protection. Bram Pike's wound was not deep, but it was poisoned by the same filth that had defined his life. By the second day, a fever had set in, a consuming heat that had nothing to do with the knife and everything to do with the whiskey that was no longer in his system. He thrashed on the small cot Elowin had set up near the hearth, his hands clutching at blankets that were not there, his eyes seeing a past she could not enter. He did not call for Elowin. He called for Sarah. "Sarah, the money!" he moaned, his voice a dry rasp. "I have it. It is safe. Just hold on. For the girl. For Elle." Elowin, who had been wiping his face with a cool, damp cloth, froze. Her mother's name. "I have it," he muttered, his hand fumbling, trying to reach his own boot. He can't drink this. It's for the train. For the girl." Cyrus was outside, attempting to salvage what little he could from the wreckage of the barn, his presence a dark, steady rhythm of pounding and sorting. Elowin was alone with the ghost of her father. She looked at his boot. A desperate, sick curiosity took hold of her. She had always assumed his boots held a hidden flask, a last resort. She kneeled, her hands shaking, and pulled the heavy, worn boot from his foot. It was not a bottle. Tucked deep inside, beneath the worn sole liner, was a folded, oil-stained letter. It was wrapped around a small, thin packet of bills, banknotes. Not many, perhaps $50. Her fingers were numb as she unfolded the letter. The ink was faded, the handwriting familiar, elegant and heartbreaking. It was her mother's hand. "My dearest Bram, I have sold the last of my mother's silver. It is not much, but it is enough. It is enough for 2 passages on the train to Santa Fe, and a little over to rent a small room. This place is killing you. The drink has your soul, but it will not have my daughter's. I'm sending this money with Mr. Gable. He will give it to you when you sell the press. Take Elowen. Take my daughter and go west. Start new. Do this one thing for me. For her. I will follow when the shop is settled. Elowen looked at the date. It was from 5 years ago. 3 weeks before the cholera had taken her mother. 3 weeks before her mother died, believing she had saved her daughter and her husband. He had sold the press. He had taken the money. And he had stayed. He had drunk their escape. He had drunk their future. He had let his wife die alone, waiting for a man who was already at the bottom of a bottle. She looked at the man on the cot, a pathetic, feverish shell, mumbling about the money he was saving. A cold, pure rage, sharper than any grief she had ever known, rose in her chest. She wanted to smother him. She wanted to shake him until his bones rattled, but the rage passed, quick as a flash fire, leaving only a cold, vast emptiness. He was not a monster. He was just weak, a hollowed-out man, haunted by one good intention he had been unable to fulfill. "Bram," she whispered, her voice rough. He opened his eyes, the fever burning in them. He saw her. "Elle, is it safe?" She held up the letter. He did not need to be sober to understand. The recognition was instant. The fever, the withdrawal, the guilt, it all coalesced into one terrible, lucid moment. He saw the letter, and he saw his daughter's face, and he was, for the first time, truly, agonizingly sober. I kept it," he wept, the tears hot and real. I was going to, tomorrow. It has been tomorrow for 5 years. Father. Elowen said. The words were not sharp. They were dead. She put the money and the letter on the table. "I cannot forgive you today." He flinched, as if she had struck him. "I may never be able to forgive you," she said, her voice shaking but her will like iron. "But you are my father, and I will not let you die here, in this house, like this." She took a ragged breath. "I will not abandon you. I will not be you." Cyrus entered the house then, his face black with soot. He took in the scene in one sharp glance. Elowen, rigid with a pain that was not physical. Bram, weeping, the letter on the table. He did not need to read it. He understood. He looked at Bram, his disgust warring with the new, raw tenderness he felt for the woman standing over him. He made a decision. "I'm taking him to the mission," he said, his voice quiet. Elowen looked up, surprised. "Sister Myra's chapel. It is 10 miles south. She takes in men like him. She will clean the wound. She will see him through the fever. He will be safe there. And," he added, his voice hardening, "he will be out of Silas's reach, and out of yours." It was an act of profound, unexpected mercy. Elowen nodded, her throat too tight to speak. They loaded Bram onto one of the mules. He was quiet now, trembling, his shame a heavier burden than his fever. Cyrus rode with him, his gelding tied to the mule, and Elowen watched them go, 2 broken men disappearing into the gray morning. She did not know that Silas Breed was watching, too, from a high ridge, through a brass spyglass. He saw Cyrus Vale leave the ranch, heading south. He saw the ranch was crippled. He saw the woman, alone. He had given his word. He had told her he would burn the roots. Cyrus returned just after noon. He was riding hard. He did not need to speak. Elowen saw it in his face. He was looking past her, his eyes wide with a new, terrible understanding. He was looking at the northern sky. It was red, a deep, sick, bloody red, pulsing like a wound. The wind, shifting, carried the smell. Not the sharp, acrid smell of burning pine from their barn. This was the smell of 1,000,000 acres of dry grama grass. "The meadow," Cyrus whispered, vaulting from his horse. "He's fired the pasture." It was not an attack. It was an execution. It was the end of dry Cedar Basin. They ran to the low ridge behind the house, The entire northern pasture, their winter grazing, their future, was a wall of flame, a roaring, advancing tide of fire, 5 miles wide. And in the middle of it, trapped against a sheer cliff face on the far side, was their herd, the small, precious cluster of 30-odd cattle that were the ranch's entire wealth. Their screams, thin and terrified, carried on the hot wind. "We'll lose them," Cyrus yelled, his voice raw with despair. "They're trapped." Elowen grabbed his arm, her nails digging in, pointing not at the fire, but to the east. "The canal, the old irrigation channel, it is dry, but it is deep. It is a fire break. If we can get them over the canal, the fire cannot follow." "It's their only chance," Cyrus said, his mind snapping into focus. He ran for his horse, Brindle at his heels, barking, understanding the panic. "I'll ride point," he shouted, swinging into the saddle. "I'll try to turn them. You and Brindle, keep them from breaking back. Keep them moving." He galloped into the smoke, a lone figure charging into the apocalypse. Elowen, her skirts tied up around her waist, ran after him, the dog a black streak at her side. The heat was a physical blow. The air was unbreathable, filled with smoke and stinging embers. The cattle were mad, a swirling, terrified mass. Cyrus, his face wrapped in his neckerchief, rode his gelding directly into the inferno. He fired his pistol into the air, the sound swallowed by the roar of the flames. He screamed, his voice cracking, turning the lead steer. The herd broke. A stampede of terror, running blindly from the fire, following the path he had given them. They were headed for the canal. Welcome. The only crossing was a narrow, rickety wooden bridge, built years ago. "For wagons." "It will hold," Cyrus yelled. "Push them, push them!" He took the point, riding onto the bridge first, to show the cattle the way. He was halfway across when a burning cottonwood, its roots eaten by the fire, crashed into the ravine just upstream. A cascade of burning debris and dislodged rock struck the bridge's old pilings. Elowen watched, in a terrible slow-motion clarity, as the main beam beneath Cyrus shattered. The bridge did not collapse. It twisted, dropping, plunging Cyrus and his horse into the deep, churning water of the canal, which was no longer dry, but was a raging torrent, filled with the runoff and ash from the burning hills. "Cyrus!" she screamed. He was tangled in the reins, his boot caught in the stirrup. The horse, screaming, was going under, pulling him down. He was drowning. She ran, stumbling, her lungs on fire. She could not reach him. He was in the center of the channel, his hand grappling for purchase. And then he was gone, pulled under by the weight of the panicking horse. No, Brindle, who had been snapping at the heels of the lagging cattle, saw what Elowen saw. He did not hesitate. He was not a dog. He was a black-coated fury. He leapt from the bank, not at Cyrus, but at the horse's head. He missed, but his eyes, sharp and intelligent, saw the trailing leather rein, floating on the black water. He grabbed it, his teeth locked. He hit the end of the rope, the force of it nearly yanking him under. He did not let go. He swam, his legs churning, not for the bank he had left, but for the one Cyrus was being swept toward. He braced his feet on the muddy slope, his muscles trembling, his teeth still clamped on the leather. It was not enough to pull the horse, but it was enough. The small, steady pressure turned the horse's head. The gelding found a frantic, brief purchase on the bottom. It was the 1 second Cyrus needed. He wrenched his boot free. He surfaced, gasping, spitting black water, and grabbed his horse's mane. He let the current and the dog's steady pull guide them, half drowned, to the far bank. He collapsed onto the mud, his chest heaving, his horse scrambling up beside him. Elowen, who had crossed on the stampeding heels of the last steer, fell to her knees beside him. Brindle, his duty done, licked Cyrus's face, his entire body rigum. Cyrus rolled over, coughing, his body shaking. He looked at Elowen, his eyes wide. He looked at the dog. He looked at his cattle. safe on the far side, as the fire reached the canal and stopped. A roaring, frustrated beast denied its prey. They were alive. They had nothing, but they were alive. Dawn. The world was black and gray. The fire was gone, leaving behind a sterile, smoking desert. Dry Cedar Basin was a name on a map. Nothing more. Elowen stood in the ashes of the meadow, her shawl pulled tight. She was shaking. The delayed shock of the night, of the bridge, consuming her. He won, she whispered, her voice trembling. He took it all. Cyrus, the pasture, the barn, our water. There is nothing left. She looked up at him, her eyes hollow, her resolve finally, utterly broken. Maybe we should go, just leave. We have the cattle. We can sell them in Socorro. We can just disappear, please. Cyrus looked at the devastation. He looked at the black scarred earth that he had poured his grief into for 3 years. He had built a fortress to keep the world out, and the world had come and burned it to the ground. He looked at Elowen. She was his home now. The house was just wood. The land was just dirt. She was the root. He stepped toward her, his hands, blackened and raw, coming up to rest on her shoulders. No, he said. His voice was quiet, but it was the steadiest thing in the ruined world. This is home. He touched her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. He burned the grass. He did not burn the roots. He did not get us. We are not leaving. A rider appeared on the ridge. A lone, exhausted figure. It was Estelle Bragg. She rode up, her face grim, taking in the total destruction. My God, she breathed. He is an animal. He is a cornered one. Cyrus said, his voice hard. And he is about to be a caged one. Estelle said, her eyes flashing. I have news. The territorial judge, Laramie Stoke, he is riding the circuit. He is not in Santa Fe. He is coming here. He will convene a public tribunal in Kestrel's Bluff in 3 days. He will, Elowen said, her voice hollow. And the town will hide. They will not speak. The ledger is damning, Estelle agreed. But Silas will claim it is a forgery. Dent Avery will plead ignorance, without a human voice. Judge Stoke may have his hands tied. We need someone from the town to stand up. We need Lissa Mott. Elowen looked at Estelle, and then at Cyrus. The last piece of the puzzle fell into place. Her fear, her exhaustion. It all burned away, replaced by a cold, sharp, diamond-hard resolve. They will not come to the courthouse, she said. The courthouse is a place of law they do not trust. She looked toward the distant, hazy smoke of Kestrel's Bluff. So I will go to them. I will go where they are already. Elowen, no, Cyrus said, grabbing her arm. Not the lantern jaw. It is a tiger's den. He will kill you before you speak a word. He will not kill me in a room full of his own customers, Elowen said, pulling her arm free. He is a businessman. He is on the defensive. I am not going there to fight him. I am going there to find Lissa Mott, and to tell her she is not alone. She turned, her decision absolute, and walked toward the house to prepare. Cyrus watched her go. He was terrified. He was prouder than he had ever been in his life. He could not speak. The words would not come. He followed her inside, as she was pulling her one clean shawl, the one that smelled of smoke, over her shoulders. He stopped her. He said nothing. He reached into the small wooden box on the mantelpiece, the one he had not touched since that first day. He took out the small, velvet-wrapped object. He unwrapped it. It was a silver pin, a simple, 8-pointed star, its surface worn with time. It was Rowena's, he said, his voice thick. It was her grandmother's, from Vermont. She wore it. She wore it when we were married. She said it was her compass. Elowen looked at the pin. Her breath caught in her throat. He did not ask. He took the lapel of her thick shawl, and with a hand that was surprisingly gentle, he pinned the silver star to the dark wool. It was a speck of light against the ash and smoke. It was not a token. It was not a gift. It was his trust. It was his past and his future. Come back, he whispered. It was not an order. It was a prayer. The circuit judge, Laramie Stoke, did not hold court in the courthouse. It had burned down 2 years prior under suspicious circumstances, and Silas Breed had ensured it was never rebuilt. Instead, the trial was convened in the Kestrel's Bluff grain and feed warehouse. The place smelled of raw flour, burlap, and the sharp, dry scent of rodent poison. It was vast, cold, and lit by the gray, unforgiving light of a high desert morning, streaming through the dusty upper windows. The town was there. They were not seated on benches. They stood in the aisles between massive, towering stacks of grain sacks, their faces pale, their eyes watchful. They were not spectators. They were witnesses to a siege. Judge Stoke, a man whose face looked like it was carved from granite, sat at a rough plank table. Beside him, a jury of 6 men, a miller, 2 ranchers from the high country, a nervous telegraph operator, and the town's undertaker looked profoundly uncomfortable. Silas Breed sat at the defense table, his velvet waistcoat unbuttoned, his expression one of bored contempt. Beside him, Dent Avery, stripped of his badge, stared at his own hands. The territory versus Silas Breed and Dent Avery, Judge Stoke announced, his voice a gravelly boom that needed no amplification. Counselor Bragg, you may proceed. Estelle Bragg, dressed in severe, practical black, stood. Your Honor, the prosecution will prove that Mr. Breed and Mr. Avery have engaged in a criminal conspiracy of coercive labor, fraud, bribery, and arson. Our evidence rests on 2 sets of books. She laid them on the plank table, the thick official ledger and the small, black, heat-warped notebook. The first, she said, is the lie Mr. Breed told his partners. The second, she placed her hand on the black book, is the truth he kept for himself. I call Miss Elowen Pike. Elowen walked forward. The entire vast, silent room watched her, the silver star pinned to her shawl. Rowena's star seemed to gather the sparse light. She did not look at Silas. She looked only at the judge. She swore her oath. Miss Pike, Estelle said, please examine the black ledger. Read the entry for the 12th of October. Elowen opened the book. Her voice, when she spoke, was not a victim's. It was a clerk's. Clear, steady, and damning. Bram Pike, she read. Debt 1 barrel. Best whiskey. Collateral daughter. Signed with an X. She paused, then turned a page. Now, the official ledger, same date, Bram Pike, cash advance $30. A low murmur rippled through the stacks of grain sacks. Please continue, Miss Pike, Estelle said. Anna Garcia. Elowen read from the black book. Debt passage to Tularosa, collateral self, signed with an X. Lissa Mott, debt whiskey, $40, collateral service, signed with an X. Objection, Silas's hired lawyer. A slick man from Santa Fe leapt to his feet. This is theater. That book is a forgery, obtained through theft. These are simple, consensual labor contracts. Consensual, Estelle's voice was ice. I call Lissa Mott. If the first murmur was a ripple, this was a wave. All eyes turned. The young barmaid from the Lantern Jaw, the one Elowen had returned to find, was walking down the center aisle. She was shaking so violently Elowen could see it from the stand. She clutched a small, worn Bible in her hands. She took the oath, her voice a terrified whisper. Miss Mott, Estelle said, her voice softening. You just heard your name. Did you make that X marks? Lissa Mott stared at her own feet. She looked at Silas, who was watching her, his eyes flat and cold as a snake's. She looked at Elowen, who met her gaze with quiet, steady strength. Yes, ma'am, Lissa whispered. I did. Why? My mother, she was sick, the fever. We needed medicine and food. Mr. Breed, he said he'd give me $40 credit. He said I could work it off, just serving drinks. He was so kind. And was it just serving drinks? Lissa, Estelle asked. Her voice quiet. Lissa's face crumpled. The terror broke, replaced by a torrent of scalding shame. No, ma'am. She turned. her weeping eyes finding the judge. He waited 2 days. Then he said the debt was higher. He said interest, and he said I had to work upstairs. He said if I didn't, he'd tell the town my ma was a debtor and he'd take our room. The silence in the warehouse was absolute. It was the silence of men who had drunk at that bar, who had seen Lissa's pale face, and who had looked away. He lied. Lissa wept. He said it was a job, but it was a cage. She's hysterical. Silas's lawyer snapped. She is a witness, Judge Stoke corrected, his eyes boring into Dent Avery. Deputy, you are the law in this town. You were aware of these labor practices. Avery started, his face slick with sweat. I knew nothing. That book. He pointed a shaking finger at the ledger. That's stolen. It's not legal evidence. Estelle Bragg stepped forward. On the contrary, Mr. Avery, this book was seized under a territorial writ, which I, as an officer of the court, served on you in Tinned Hills. You were, at the time, attempting to aid in the escape of Mr. Breed. Your resistance to that writ, in fact, makes you an accomplice. The writ, Your Honor, is sealed. This ledger is, as of that moment, the legal property of this court. Avery's face went from pale to gray. The legal trap, the one he had tried to spring, had closed on him instead. I call Cyrus Vale, Estelle said. Cyrus moved from the shadows near the door, where he and Jory Penn had been standing, watching. He took the stand, dwarfing the small chair. Mr. Vale, you were present when Silas Breed attempted to enforce the contract on Miss Pike. I was, Cyrus said. His voice was low, carrying the weight of the open range. I saw her father make his mark. I saw Breed's pleasure in it. I saw the trap. And what did you do? I paid him. Silas Breed smirked. His lawyer leaned forward. So, you admit it. You bought the girl, just as Mr. Breed did. It's a simple transaction. What's the crime in that? Cyrus Vale turned. Not to the lawyer, but to the jury. I offered him double the price of the whiskey. I put the silver on the bar. He paused, his gaze finding Elowen's. And then I tore the contract in half. I did not buy her. I did not buy her labor. I bought her freedom. I paid to have the debt nullified, because a human life, he said, his voice a low, steady condemnation, is not collateral for a bottle of whiskey. Not in my house, not in this territory. The miller on the jury nodded. Once, to himself. It is a lie, Silas roared, surging to his feet. He wanted her, he took her. Sit down, Mr. Breed, Judge Stoke commanded. He's a thief, and she's a... No. The voice was a dry, rasping croak from the back of the warehouse. The crowd parted. Bram Pike, supported by Jory Penn, staggered forward. He was a ghost, his face hollowed by fever and withdrawal, his arm in a sling. He looked at Elowen, his eyes filled with a terrible, clear-headed shame. Father, Elowen breathed, her hand going to her mouth. Bram ignored her. He looked at the judge. I am a drunkard. I am a waste of God's good air. He swayed, and Jory's hand steadied him. I did it, he confessed, the words tearing from his throat. I took my girl, my Sarah's girl, and I tried to trade her. For a drink. He turned his burning, feverish eyes on Silas Breed. I am a coward. I am a monster. But she is my daughter, and I'm telling this court, and God, she belongs to no one. He collapsed. Jory Penn caught him, lifting the ruined man as if he were a child. Judge Stoke let the silence hang for a long, heavy moment. He turned to the jury. Gentlemen, you have the ledgers. You have the testimony. I do not believe we need to recess. The jury foreman, the miller, stood. He did not confer. We do not, Your Honor. The wind, finding a loose piece of tin on the roof, rattled it, a sound like a drum roll. Judge Stoke stood, and the entire warehouse, as one, seemed to stand with him. Silas Breed, the judge's voice boomed. This court of the New Mexico Territory finds you guilty. Guilty of coercive labor and indentured servitude. Guilty of conspiracy to defraud. Guilty of bribery of a peace officer. Guilty of arson. You will be remanded to the federal prison at Yuma for a term of no less than 20 years. He turned. Dent Avery. This court finds you guilty as an accomplice to all charges. You will serve 10 years. It happened before the last word had echoed off the rafters. Silas Breed was not a man of law. He was a cornered rat. He had been smiling, a rictus of disbelief. The smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, reptilian hatred. "This is my town," he shrieked, his hand diving inside his velvet waistcoat. He was not aiming for the judge. He was not aiming for Cyrus. He was aiming for Elowen. He pulled a small, pearl-handled derringer. He never had the chance to level it. Cyrus Vale roared, lunging forward, but Jory Penn, standing guard by Bram, was closer. The blacksmith did not go for the gun. He reacted with the instinct of a man who moves heavy things for a living. He grabbed the nearest thing, a 100-pound sack of feed corn. With a grunt that tore from his chest, he heaved it, swinging it like a weapon. At the exact same moment, Cyrus, moving faster than Elowen had ever seen him move, did not try to cross the space. He grabbed the heavy plank table where the lawyers sat and upended it. The plank of wood and the sack of corn hit Silas Breed in the same instant. The table struck him high, in the chest, and the sack struck him low. He went down, a cloud of flour dust and scattered papers exploding around him. The derringer flew from his hand, skittering across the floor. He was on his back, the wind knocked from him, gasping like a landed fish. As Cyrus's boot came down on his gun hand, Jory Penn, in one smooth motion, kicked the derringer away. For a full 5 seconds, the warehouse was frozen. The only sound was Silas's high-pitched, wheezing gasp. Then, a new sound. A sharp, metallic click-click. It was the sound of handcuffs. Estelle Bragg had produced them from her valise and tossed them to Jory. The blacksmith was ratcheting them tight around Silas Breed's wrists. Cyrus, retrieving the gun, handed it to the judge, a single person in the crowd. The telegraph operator let out a shaky, half-hysterical laugh. Then someone clapped, a slow, hesitant, single clap. Then another, and another. It was not a cheer. It was not a sound of victory. It was the sound of a long, high fever finally breaking. It was the sound of 200 people remembering how to breathe. It was the collective, shuddering sigh of a town that had just realized, all at once, that it was no longer afraid. The trial's end did not bring celebration. It brought a vast, exhausted silence. The wound in Kestrel's bluff had been lanced, the poison removed. Silas Breed and Dent Avery were gone, bound for the territorial prison at Yuma, their procession watched by a quiet, unmoving populace. The town was left, not with victory, but with the hollow space where the fear had been. Then the rains came. It was not the driving hail of that first night, nor the false promise of a storm. It was a slow, steady, soaking rain that lasted for 3 full days. It washed the ash from the air. It settled the dust. At Dry Cedar Basin, the black, smoking pasture drank it in, the charred earth turning dark and rich. The canal, which had saved them, overflowed its banks. And then, as it always does in the high desert, the green returned. It was a miracle of stubbornness. The roots, as Cyrus had promised, had held. A week after the rain, a wagon appeared on the ridge. It was Jory Penn. His wagon was loaded with new-cut pine timbers and salvaged, straight metal from the wreckage of the wind tower. Behind him came the miller, his wagon heavy with sacks of grain and flour. Then Tomer Quill, sober, with a crate of tools. They came to Dry Cedar Basin. They did not come to offer condolences. They came to work. They were a town rebuilding its own soul. They had watched Cyrus Vale and Elowen Pike stand up when they had all been cowed. This was not a debt. It was an acknowledgement. For 7 days, the ranch echoed with the sounds of saws, hammers, and the quiet, steady voices of men working together. Where the twisted, skeletal ruin had been, a new wind tower rose. It was taller than the first, its base anchored in stone, its blades catching the clean, new wind, Bram Pike, his arm in a sling, his body racked by the tremors of sobriety, sat on the porch and watched them. He had been present for the building, a silent, ashamed spectator. When the last nail was driven, he stood, his legs unsteady. He found Elowin by the well, drawing the first clean water from the new pump. "El," he said, his voice a dry rasp. I cannot stay." He gestured to the new tower, the sound of its smooth, powerful turning. "This is a place for builders. I am a breaker." He had heard of Sister Myra's mission at San Telmo, a place 2 days' ride to the south, where men went to fight the drink, to sweat it out of their souls by working the unforgiving earth. He was going. "I do not ask you to forgive me," he said, his eyes finally meeting hers, clear and shamed. "I only ask that you let me go." Elowin looked at this ghost of her father, this man who had, for one lucid instant, been brave. The rage she had felt over her mother's letter was gone, burned away, leaving only a vast, aching sorrow. She went into the house. She returned, not with the money he had stolen, but with a small, simple string of blue glass beads. They had been her mother's. "She prayed with these," Elowin said, pressing them into his shaking, calloused hand. "She believed in redemption." She stepped back. "When you find yours, when you wish to come home, the door will remain open. Father—" He could not speak. He clutched the beads, his knuckles white, and turned. He walked south, down the wagon road, a small, solitary figure, not once looking back. 2 days later, Cyrus returned from Kestrel's Bluff. He found Elowin in the main room, mending the tool chest that Marlowe Knott had slit. He did not speak, but handed her a folded sheaf of papers. She opened it. It was a legal document, bearing the new territorial seal and the crisp, clear signature of Estelle Bragg. It was a deed of partnership. She read the names, her breath catching. It was not just his. "Cyrus," she whispered. This is the deed to the ranch." "It is," he said, his voice rough as he stacked wood by the hearth. "But my name is on it. Vale and Pike Homestead. I have no money to buy in." He stopped his work. He turned to her, his face serious, his gray eyes clear and steady. "A house needs to stand on 2 names. Elowin," he said, "or the first wind will take it. This ranch is as much yours as it is mine. The law just made it true." He was not just talking about the ranch. He was talking about them. The seasons turned, the scarred earth healed. The old, half-burned line shack that had survived the fire became Elowin's project. Cyrus, seeing the determination in her eyes, helped her. He mended the roof. She whitewashed the walls, the lime covering the soot, making it bright and clean. She brought in her battered copy of Whitman. She brought the Bible she had mended. She brought 3 primers she'd ordered from Santa Fe. She opened the reading room. The children from the neighboring ranches came, at first shy, their bare feet dusty on the new porch. Lissa Mott, who now worked as Estelle Bragg's full-time clerk, brought 2 small children whose mothers had also been names in Silas Breed's black ledger. Elowin taught them. She taught them their letters, the magic of sounds, the power of signing your name, not your mark, the sound of children's laughter, the high, clear sound of recitation, drifted across the basin. It was the sound Cyrus Vale had built the house for, the sound he thought had died with Rowena. He stood at his new fence line, listening, and for the first time in 3 years, the lines of grief around his mouth softened. The autumn came, the air sharp as cold water, the sky a deep, aching blue. Kestrel's Bluff held its first harvest festival in 5 years. It was not at the saloon, which had been shuttered, its windows boarded. It was in the street, under the wide, open sky. Tables groaned with pies, smoked beef, and corn. Lanterns, carved from pumpkins, cast a warm, flickering orange glow. A fiddler, perched on a barrel, struck up a lively tune. Cyrus, his good shirt stiff and unfamiliar, stood by Elowin near the bonfire. He looked profoundly uncomfortable. He began, clearing his throat. "I am not a dancer." Elowen smiled, the firelight catching the silver star on her shawl. "Neither am I, Mr. Vale." She took his hand. "But perhaps we can learn." He was as awkward as she had imagined. He was a man built for breaking horses and mending stone, not for keeping time. He was stiff, his boots heavy, his movements a half-step behind the music, his brow furrowed in concentration. Elowen laughed. It was not a small sound. It was a clear, free, joyous laugh that carried over the music. Cyrus stopped his clumsy shuffle. Embarrassed, she did not let him go. She stepped closer, into his space, and laid her hand flat on his chest, over his heart. She could feel the steady, strong thump-thump beneath her palm. She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the pumpkin light. "This," she whispered, her voice for him alone. "This rhythm, this one is mine. I can dance to this." He stopped trying to move his feet. He just held her, his hand firm on her back, there in the middle of the street, and they swayed. 2 still points in the turning. Joyful world. The ride home was quiet. The mule's hooves soft on the dusty road. The stars were a brilliant. Cold scatter against the black. Brindle met them at the porch, his tail a happy, thumping greeting. The air was cold. Elowen shivered. Cyrus dismounted and came to her side. He did not just help her down. He reached up, his hand spanning her waist, and lifted her from the saddle. He did not set her down. He just held her, her feet inches from the ground, her face level with his. "Elowen," he said, his voice a low vibration in the night. He set her down, but he did not release her. He unfastened his heavy wool cloak, the one she had worn that first night, and draped it over her shoulders, pulling her into its warmth, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her back against his chest. They stood together, 2 figures in one cloak, looking out at the vast, silent, starlit basin. "Rowena," Cyrus said, his voice quiet, his breath stirring her hair. "She loved this view. She loved the autumn. When she died, I thought my heart was buried with her. I thought this ranch was just a grave, a marker to prove I had failed." He turned her, gently, to face him. His hands rested on her shoulders, his gaze intense in the starlight. "You are not a ghost, Elowen. You are not a debt." He took her hand, the one with the small, pale scar on the wrist, and lifted it, pressing his lips to the mark he had inadvertently helped create. "You," he said, his voice thick, "are the green that comes after the fire. You are the water from the new well. You are the house, the rest. The rest is just wood." He reached into his pocket. He did not pull out a ring. He pulled out a single, clean, iron nail, a nail from the frame of the new reading room. "I do not have the words of your poets," he stammered, this proud, silent man. "I only have this. I am asking, will you build this life with me? Will you be my wife?" Elowen felt the tears, hot and sudden, spill over. She did not speak. She reached up, her hands cold, and framed his rough, stubbled face. She pulled his head down to hers. She kissed him. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the fireside. This was a kiss of certainty. It was slow and deep and sure. It was the taste of wood smoke and coffee and the clean, cold night. It was the promise of every morning, every evening, every day to come. It was the feeling of his hands moving from her shoulders to her back, pulling her flush against him, holding her, anchoring her, as if she were the only real thing in the world. Her arms wrapped around his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair. They held each other, their breathing slowing, matching. He leaned his forehead against hers. The vast, starry night, like a quiet, respectful curtain, descended around them. The sun rose on a new world. Elowen woke, wrapped in the cloak, to the smell of fresh sawn pine and new paint. Cyrus was on the porch, hanging a long, new plank of wood above the walkway. She came to stand beside him. She read the lettering, her own elegant script, which she had drawn, and which he had carefully, lovingly carved and painted, Vale Pike Homestead. And beneath it, in smaller, Neat letters, books. Beef, better days. He did not turn. His arm slid around her waist, pulling her against his side. A new sound, a high, thin meow, came from the pasture. A calf, born in the night, its coat the color of new cream, was wobbling beside its mother. Brindle, overjoyed, ran circles around the new arrival, barking his welcome, laughter. Clear and bright, it was Elowen's. Cyrus joined in. A low, rusty sound. A sound of pure, simple joy. It was the sound the house had been built for. Later that day, Elowen went to the small, bright reading room. She took a clean sheet of paper. She dipped her pen in the ink. She wrote, her script firm and clear, and pinned the note to the new wooden door. In this place, no one is bought or sold. In this place, we are free to choose. The day ended. The sun, a great bleeding ball of orange, began to set, painting the peaks of Kestrel's Bluff in gold and deep, bruised purple. Cyrus and Elowen stood at the new fence line, their shoulders almost touching. They watched the light fade. They were not two survivors. They were a family, a new, quiet, steady West, built not on luck or gold, but on the stubborn, unyielding roots of a better day. Thank you for listening to this story. We would be honored if you would comment below and let us know where in the world you are listening from, so we can share our thoughts. Please, subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like this video, and support us further by pressing the hype button, so this story can be heard by many more.